Hello, everybody. Thank you all for joining the stream. If you watch some of my past streams, you'll notice some stuff's different. I got a stream graphic going. I've got the correct audio input, which I think is going to make a huge difference. The audio in my last few streams where I used the webcam was not good. I made a post about this where I figured out that the reason why the audio was so terrible was that I was actually getting audio through my webcam, which has a microphone on it, which I plugged in so that I could do a little face cam for the gameplay. And goodness, that was a mess. I was doing things with like my condenser mic, my nice condenser mic that used to record my videos. I was like trying different settings on it. I was doing recordings to try and listen to it back and trying to figure out why the audio was so messed up. And I couldn't figure it out until I was poking around in settings and figured out that I was using a default audio input, which was the webcam and not this microphone. So hopefully from now on, the audio will be bearable. I'm going to keep my eye on it. I'm going to listen back to the VOD and make sure that it's okay at the end of it. And then a bit about the stream asset. It's very much provisional. I just want to have something because I have some of the After Effects experience for making graphics like this. I think there's going to be updates to it. There's probably going to be a completely new look shortly. I like to stream a lot. I'd like to get a friend to make me a little introduction track. So I'll probably do something to sync like the waiting screen with the introduction track and just let that run for a little bit longer so that people can kind of fill in. Lots of different ideas for streams. I've been enjoying it a lot. I want to keep doing it. I want to keep working on it. So thank you everybody for joining. Here's what we're going to be doing today. First, we're going to go back to our roots, so to speak. I'm going back to doing another research stream. This one I'm going to cut a little bit short. I'm probably going to go for about like 40 minutes. 45 minutes is what I'm expecting. And going over this video about technological optimism, specifically centered on Big Hero 6, the 2014 Disney film. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically what I think about this video, I did a bit of research for it a few months ago. Haven't picked it up for a while. Just kind of like looking over the research I've done so far. Got some ideas for like some new directions about what I'm going to do with the video. So I'll be going over that and outlining the video. Going to try and work on it and hopefully, I don't know when I'll be able to deliver it. Ideally within a week. Like on or around next weekend would be really fantastic. Because the streaming games is fun, but I think, making video essays is something that is interesting to me, that other people are interested in, so I want to keep doing that. After that, I have another scheduled stream that you can see on my channel for playing the Bazaar later on. And yeah, in about an hour, so I'll take 40 minutes in this stream. Then I'll go on to playing the Bazaar and at the top of the hour, and I'll play that for about 2 hours. So I think that's the plan for today. And I don't think going into the future this is going to be a very unusual format for a stream. I think this is a nice combination of things to do. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, let's get right into it. I'll copy and paste over what I have for the Big Hero 6 document. And hi, by the way, if you haven't watched any of the gameplay, this is what I look like. I've been using the webcam for the gameplay, so I don't see any reason to not put it on for a research stream like this. Okay, so let's get into the ideas that I had for the Big Hero 6 video. And there are going to be spoilers for Big Hero 6. It's quite an old film. I don't feel bad about spoiling it, given how old it is. And I don't think like the spoilers are that tremendous either. I mean, there is like one big spoiler, the like reveal of the main villain. But I'm not too concerned about ruining that for anybody who might be watching. So the idea about Big Hero 6, the idea about this video that I want to make is that I think it reflects this idea of technological optimism that when this video came out, there is a legitimate, prevalent idea that we were going to fix like the world's problems. That we were going to be able to, that there were definitely challenges in the world like inequality, climate change, corruption, maybe that sort of thing. There are definitely problems in the world, but that those problems are tractable and that we're like on the right path towards solving them, and that the system, the kind of infrastructure, the institutions that exist will be able to handle those challenges, right? So it's a very kind of optimistic, technocratic view of the world because, of course, the characters in Big Hero 6 are researchers, they're scientists, they're young people that have a lot of that optimism for themselves. And I think in the time since then, this view of optimism has kind of fallen apart. I think I probably want to find some studies to show like kind of what people think. So I'll start outlining the video. In the introduction, I need to move my microphone a little bit to get to my keyboard. Jesus, I need to reposition this microphone quite a bit so I can type. Okay. So can I zoom in? I can't. And I think the I feel like finding some polls would really help my argument. It's like this video, the premise of this video. Um, well, let me finish the argument. Let me finish typing out the argument. Um, so this, I think, is an argument that comes out of like vibes. This is what I intuitively think might be true. It does to me. Well, or maybe it's just like a matter of my own personal journey. When I saw Big Hero 6 in 2014 when I was in college, when it was in theaters, and I might include a little bit of this personal context in the video, I was pretty excited about it. And I did think that it was a reasonable view of the world that kind of through technology we would be able to fix things. Now, I'm not so optimistic necessarily. I do think that there are problems that exist that might not be tractable with like existing science or like scientific development or with like existing institutions. And I don't think it's wild to say that a lot of people seem to feel a similar way. They feel a sense of pessimism that kind of in the intervening decade since 2014, there hasn't the institutions that exist now haven't become more effective at addressing kind of like large scale problems and might even be going in the opposite direction, right? I think so, but I don't know personally if this like actually is true, right? Maybe I have like a very narrow view. I have a narrow view of public opinion, and this is a minority opinion. Maybe people are optimistic and they believe in technology at about the same rates as before. Again, that's not my perception, but part of this research process is to find out what the truth is, if it's true or not. And if it's not true, if people are about the same level of optimism, I think that is also a story, and that can be worked into into like this argument. Okay, so I think there's a lot of interesting content that can kind of be worked into telling this story, making this argument. It's interesting because this movie exists at the intersection of several different, pretty, I think, well researched um, topics. So here's the list of like sites that I got during my initial research. It was very much asking the question of like how much, mm, what is like Big Hero 6's interpretation of technological optimism, or kind of what is its guiding philosophy, what is its aesthetic philosophy. There's a lot written about its aesthetic principles because Big Hero 6 has a very well developed look to it. And there's a book about the art of Big Hero 6, which discusses the process by which they crafted the environments. There's a lot of really interesting technology that went into this, where they kind of procedurally generated the entire city of San Francisco, where the movie takes place, and they modeled it so that it could be like a consistent and accurate playground for their overhead shots when the main character is flying through the city. Um, and so here are a variety of the sites that I found that kind of were tangentially related to broadly what we think about technology and whether or not people believe that technology would fix everything. Let me see. Okay, and this is an idea that I was thinking about more, which is that I think in addition to coming up with research about what people broadly think about technology, I think it's would be valuable to really hone in on like the unique kind of historical circumstances of Big Hero 6. Okay, um, so some ways to build my argument. I wanted to talk about the creation broadly for background, but then related to its context. And this is the technocratic context. What I mean by this is I was reflecting about this, and it is interesting that it is a Disney production, but John Lasseter, well, let me just pick up, get the Wikipedia page going. Was he the director? Or was he just involved? The producer? He's kind of like, I think he runs the animation division. Okay. And here it says, this is, I'm going to find like a more authoritative site about this. But here it says, Hero is one example of what we learned over the years, embracing some of the Pixar DNA. It's definitely this Pixar DNA idea, right? So, Pixar. And so I think as part of answering that question, I was going to do a brief retrospective on Pixar and kind of explain my view about it, which is that I believe just intuitively, and I guess the research needs to be done about this, that Pixar really reflects this idea that technology can be used in broad areas for good, right? Pixar created the first full-length animated film with Toy Story, and it was this idea that kind of this technology, computer graphics, could be used to create stories and inspire people and make people happy and provide a brand new form of entertainment, right? I think there probably can be an argument to be made that, and I'm going to make it if I find the evidence for it, that this kind of idea that technology can improve people is going that can improve society is going to be an undercurrent through Pixar's viewpoint. So something else that's interesting about Pixar, um, and I think the technocratic aspect is really important, in particular for this video, because the movie itself, Big Hero 6, is about like this kind of technocratic infrastructure with the academy and industry, right? Um, in the movie, industry is kind of treated as an interesting thing. It is kind of a um neutral force, I would say. It there isn't a very strong judgment I feel on industry. On the one hand, the main characters, like the crew of Big Hero 6, are able to they're able to perform their research independently, which is pretty unique. Um, and industry like doesn't play a significant role. There is like this kind of character that represents industry, and I guess that's something I'll talk about maybe later. Kide, um, but he is a very important character in the context of in the context of the movie. He's a little bit decentered, but I think the way that he's portrayed is very important for the message of the movie, especially in relation to this video. So I think Pixar itself, the Pixar DNA, I think, is one that believes that there should be that kind of industrial forces or like corporate forces can be very beneficial, right? That a that some corporate or technical infrastructure like Pixar can provide things like server farms to render people's creations, and it can, create technology in a way that's orientated in the correct direction, that is creating more lifelike computer animations that will kind of give people a sense of wonder and discovery, right? I think Pixar, by virtue of being a corporation, naturally kind of believes that corporations can have a positive influence on how technology is used, how it's transmitted to people. So I think understanding the role of Pixar in Big Hero 6 is pretty important. Maybe before this, it's important to say kind of what does Big Hero 6 say about technology and progress on a surface level. And this is kind of like the meme about how like a analysis video is actually just a plot summary. But I do think summarizing the plot here and emphasizing specific points is important. We should understand what like the premise of Big Hero 6 is on a surface level, what it says about technology, and like what its outward words are, right? Because that also relates to the initial argument that we need to establish that in 2014, Big Hero 6 does have a certain point of view about technology, and that it does seem to indicate that things can get better. Another part of this analysis that I want to do was um, either before or after. Okay, looks like. Okay, so this is either something that we um, do. This is either an exercise that will be done before discussing the history of Pixar or after. Not sure what the best order is, but I do think this would be an important part of the video, which is just to say that Pixar has provided kind of different views about whether or not like existing institutions are sufficient to serve dealing with big problems. I also want to say And it's interesting because I think there's a a a gamut of different messages about technology in Pixar films, and a, a gamut of different opinions about kind of institutions. So in A Bug's Life, okay, so in Big Hero 6, the important idea is that like institutions as they exist now are fundamentally sound. That is to say, oh, sorry, I should not be resizing this window. There's a belief that institutions are essentially sound because, let's see, the institute, like if you think about it, nothing in Big Hero 6 overthrows the institutions that exist at the beginning of the movie, right? The academy, like the university where a lot of the crew goes, are it's like fine. It doesn't play a very strong role in the movie, but it doesn't inhibit the characters either. And if anything, it seems to provide a good platform for them to do their scientific research. The structure of like the corporation and Kraytech is questionable, but ultimately not something that is heavily scrutinized in the movie. And by the end of it, it's something that is like, okay, this is just kind of part of the whole ecosystem. Um, those are really the main parties, the main institutions that are displayed, and they're both considered fine, more or less, right? And so these movies, this class of movies generates conflict through bad actors, right? That the idea that there's like either individual people that have wrong motivations or like personal problems, and that causes them to spread malicious influence using their positions of power, usually in an existing institution, or sometimes they're kind of like outside of existing institutions, and existing institutions need to like work to, be stronger and like resist outside evildoers, right? Or that institutions are able to reform themselves. And like the problem is that maybe there's like a problem in the institutions, but it's not such a strong problem that it can't be resolved or reformed from within. Okay. So to go through this list of movies that I was thinking about, in A Bug's Life, to kind of contextualize it in what I was saying, in A Bug's Life, it's a pretty interesting movie. It's an example of a movie where the main structure, the main relation in the movie that guides like the life of all the characters really, is one that is like based off of exploitation, and that needs to be completely remade. And there's like two important relationships of exploitation in A Bug's Life. One is the helper bugs that are like belong to the carnival, who are being oppressed by the flea. And then the other group, of course, are the ants that are being oppressed by the grasshoppers, right? So the carnival is kind of like over like dealing with the flea and escaping that situation. It's like a microcosm to prepare you for overthrowing the grasshoppers, right? And then and the end result in the movie is that these relations where, some where these carnival bugs are like working for this other bug, or the ants are working for the grasshoppers, is kind of completely undone by the end of the movie. And I guess there's like, you could say, okay, well, the ants have a monarch at the beginning, and I believe at the end they still have like a monarch, um, but it the on screen that relationship doesn't seem exploitative. I guess it's just like a hereditary way of organizing politics, question mark. But yeah, the ultimate, like, the relationship of production, right, is completely transformed by the end of A Bug's Life. Toy Story is an example of a movie where it's just like there aren't really relevant institutions. There isn't like a toy economy or government. It's just kind of like a, I don't know, episode of Friends or something where there's like interpersonal conflict that needs to be resolved. So that might be an example of something that's just kind of like outside of this analysis. And then Monsters Inc., I think, is an example where you could argue more that it's a case of like, we could you could argue that it represents like overturning an institution. I think Monsters Inc. indicates a world where kind of institutions are fundamentally sound, and like it's okay to kind of like keep this corporate structure, this like big power company, and like generate power in this way. But the problem with it is that like there's this evil figure, the crab guy, and he like I don't know, uses his like power and like monopolistic force to kind of like suppress the truth about children's screams or whatever. But by the end of it, it's just like I don't know, it becomes like this worker-owned co-op, and they essentially do like mostly the same job. They just kind of like reform the way that they extract energy from the children, right? I think it's a lot to me. This movie is a lot closer to what happens in Big Hero 6 than what happens in A Bug's Life, for example. And I think the argument is going to be somehow that these ideas are like kind of related to this Pixar DNA that um and it'll be interesting to see like where the story of the Bug's Life came from, but the argument will be that like somehow the Pixar DNA, the kind of corporate and historical structure of Pixar, makes it so that it's easier to kind of tell stories where institutions stay intact than the other way around. Okay. And I mean, certainly like Disney being involved, I don't know. It's just like, it's a common point of criticism or of discussion about children's movies. Just inherently, it seems lot easier to make an explicable for children story about kind of reforming institutions and overthrowing them. But yeah, let's see. Okay, so one of these will go first, then talk a little bit about the history of Pixar, and then excuse me. Um and then I think the next thing to talk about is this movie also exists at the intersection of another like really important genre that very much influences the content of the movie, which is that it's like a superhero film, right? It's explicitly a Marvel property. Um, and this is like another thing where it's like very hard to write a weekly paper comic, an episodic comic about like changing institutions, right? It's much easier to just kind of like identify a particular bad actor as like the nexus of a particular conflict and just say, okay, we need to overthrow this bad actor to um fix things, right? So, and I think this is a good time. And I think this is such like a common argument and point of criticism against like superhero movies and the MCU that I think there's going to be a lot of literature that explores the extent to which MCU movies do seem to focus on addressing bad actors versus um, systematically changing things, right? Just to give a reference, let me see. The Marvel Cinematic Universe, the live action movies, was on its way during this period, right? So this was around Captain America: The Winter Soldier, which is a pretty cool movie. And The Winter Soldier is also interesting because that's a movie where I think it's I think it does say something about institutions, and it does say that there's like kind of structural problems with having really strong bureaucratic like intelligence services, or maybe there's like this problem with intelligence services in general. I think Shield as an organization is like reformed after it's been like dehydrazed. So from that perspective. It just reforms an existing institution. But I do think it is more critical about like structures of power and preemptive attacks than some of the other movies in the MCU. Um, so this will be another point in the video. And something I haven't done yet is Big Hero 6 is actually based on an old comic. I should read the Big Hero 6 comic. So I actually am like generally a comic reader. I read mostly like Spider-Gwen. So anything with Spider-Gwen in it, I'll generally read, and I'll read like a few other things. I haven't read like the back catalog very much. I don't know about the vintage stories, so I definitely don't know what actually happens in the Big Hero 6 comic. So I'll be keen to see. Um, yeah. Okay. So that's these points. And then I think I want to do deeper dive. Right. And then after I've kind of said like this surface level idea that kind of technology. So first I'm going to introduce the premise that Big Hero 6 thinks that technological development is good and that's going to fix the problems. And I do think an important part of this is like the depiction of a diverse group of like young technologists, right? Because I do think that this at during this period and now, it is an ideological belief that like one important part of being able to solve problems with technology is making sure that it's representative, right? That kind of a diverse group of people, people of diverse backgrounds are represented in creating the technology that kind of like is going to affect the world. I think that's like pretty, I mean, I personally believe that to an extent. And I do think that is a part of the movie as well. And I do think that's like an element that kind of um, is important to like its overall message. That's an example. It kind of portrays like a semi-utopian world, and I think it's important to note that that is like kind of an element of its picture of utopianism. Um, because yeah, I think that is like this a point to make that it's not just optimism. It like stretches out to utopianism, right? Which is let's see. So the things to note are that there is crime in the world, which is kind of funny, but it's like very, it's like the underground betting rings, but it's like kind of like a nominal petty crime. Um, and there's like problems in like industrial accidents, but there aren't like, nobody really seems to want for something, right? It's like there doesn't seem to be scarcity as a significant part of the world or a significant part of the story. Um, and by the end of the film, uh, there's like a catastrophe, and then there's like a near the end of the film, there's like this catastrophe and like this disaster scene. But like overall, the vision of utopianism is restored by the end of the movie, and the general premise is that like yeah, bad things will happen. There will be bad actors, but like utopianism is achievable, and it's not just like a flash in the pan, but we can actually maintain it through. It's important to note that like a lot of the utopian aspects of the movie are created through technology, like um okay. Um, so some of the other interesting things I want to touch on in terms of what it says about technology is that it's like, so in the movie Cray, Kide is portrayed as like this antagonist, because he tries to buy heroes like nanobots, and he's seen as kind of like this money influence, like bad, or like, he's not like a traditional bad guy, so to speak, but he's like this negative influence in the context of the movie. And but it turns out, like, and then during the movie, um there's like this mysterious masked figure that tries to implement this nefarious scheme and like stealing stuff. It gets into conflict with the protagonists. Excuse me. And it's kind of alluded to that the kind of, you're thrown off to believe that the evil character is Kire, when actually it's Callahan, who's like this professor that has this burning personal motivation and is trying to get like this revenge, ironically, against Kide. Kind of like an interesting plot. So it's like a misdirection, fake bad guy type of reveal. And I think it's interesting because it's like Kide is also like a bad person. Specifically, like, it's not just that he's trying to buy this technology that Hero thinks should be free, but it's also that he kind of causes like industrial accident, which causes Kire's daughter to go missing during like a test flight, which is, I think, you know, an actual really bad thing that he did. That's kind of like papered up because the revenge is like worse, right? And it's kind of like forgotten about that. And Kira doesn't seem to like suffer any consequences from the fact that, his reckless approach to technological development caused someone to go missing. So I think like that aspect of the movie is interesting and definitely worth talking about. I think it's also interesting that like near the end, I guess, there's like this tech office of Kides that gets destroyed, and like all the different, you can see like $1,000 chairs and stuff. It's like a very standard tech office. It's probably pretty similar to like what it looks like inside of Pixar. Um, and that this is kind of like a really bad thing, which I guess, it is a bad thing, but I don't know. It's interesting. Um, that's like, I guess, the culmination of this like really really bad evil plan that the villain is trying to execute. Um, I think something else I want to emphasize that's kind of weird, thinking about the movie a little bit more, is that uh, the movie really is contingent on the main characters like taking their just neutral technical inventions that they created themselves out of their own personal interest and basically weaponizing them. And it's like kind of weird because in a movie, they have these really cool technologies, and then the act of like weaponizing their inventions is depicted very much as like this kind of big moment for them. Like it's the moment um where they're like uh where their work really becomes complete, right? The fact that, oh, before they have these abstract ideas that like, okay, maybe it could do some good, but who knows what it'll actually do. And then, the moment that they realize their potential is when they turn them basically into like riot suppression technologies, right? So for example, Honey Lemon, like, has like all these, um, she's like a chemist. So she has these like ways of generating different chemical effects that are like funny or like useful, and then she basically turns it into like this kind of these balls that she can throw that like spray out this foam that kind of like controls somebody, right? Inhibits their movement. In the context of the movie, it makes sense because there's this evil person with like these robotic arms and you want to like stop them or whatever. But the broad like impact of this technology is, it creates a very effective way to kind of control people's movements in a way that doesn't harm them directly, but that like kind of suppresses their activity. And everybody, like all the different people, like have they convert their inventions into technologies that do something like that, right? It's also ironic. It's also really ironic too because Hiro at the beginning refuses Kirei's offer to buy his nanobots because he's afraid of like he thinks that it should be used for everybody, right? But then he's like kind of leading the charge in terms of converting all these technologies into weapons. And Baymax too is kind of converted. I don't remember exactly. Like he's given rocket parts, so he might not be like fully converted to a weapon, but it is like I think he has weaponized to a degree because he is prepared to go into battle. Okay. But yeah, like, I think this kind of gearing up sequence is a very important part of superhero movies. It's a very exciting part. Gadgets and weaponry is something that superheroes have. Okay. Um, what else do I want to talk about? I mean, there's like other points too. Let me see. Hmm. Yeah, I think this really is an outline of things I want to say. There might be one or two points to make, and then there's like something to conclude it. Um, but let me think. Just going to think quietly for a moment. So I think like the kind of the redevelopment of the central argument of the video is to say that, um, let's see. It's like it predicted the downfall of its own optimistic view of the world, um, because of like unaddressed influences and forces. Something like that. Um, I think maybe one thing I do want to that might also be worth talking about that I'm thinking about myself in my personal life. Okay. And then, I think one thing that is valuable, I'll have to like think about this in detail, but I do think that there are points about like Baymax caring for Hero that are quite sincere and that I think have held up quite well, and that were good in their time. About the importance of like grieving properly and caring for oneself. And I do think that like even though there's some stuff that's like kind of contradictory or really just ironic, um, there's a lot. It's not like we're talking we're talk. This is like a work of criticism. It's talking about the movie, but it's not like saying purely negative things about it. It does, it is nice to have like utopian visions of the future. It is nice and to like reflect on and to say like, okay, you know, um, uh, let's see. But yeah, I think there's some really good messages about um, caring for oneself that I think persist and that are useful to learn and internalize. And I think that would be a nice positive note to end on. Just talk about the things that I really do like from the movie and what I think we can still get out of it. Okay, great. So I'm gonna copy this outline. I didn't like do a lot of research. I didn't really dive into these articles, but I think it's important for me to kind of like move this forward by creating an outline of what the movie can possibly be. Now that I've what this video can possibly be about. Now that I've had some time to think about the stuff that I've read and kind of think about it in context. Um, so yeah, again, I probably won't do another stream about this video until it comes out, hopefully in a week, maybe two. Definitely in 2 weeks, I think it would be good to put out another video. Yeah, so thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to be going live in just a few minutes, about like 12 minutes, on the other planned live stream. Going to be following up this kind of thinking and research with doing a little bit of gameplay for the bazaar. So hope to see you there. Take care.